Hello and welcome back to Curiosity Mine, and welcome back to Lightning Ridge in northern New South Wales, Australia. Lightning Ridge is an opal mining community, and one of the quirks of this community is that no one knows how many people live in the town because the majority of the residents of Lightning Ridge live off-grid, not by choice, but by necessity. If you'd like to learn more about Lightning Ridge's mystery population, check out this video from a while ago. Lightning Ridge has approximately 900 residential houses, which are more or less normal houses, like the houses you'd find in any Australian country town. But outside of the town centre, there are another 1,700 camps on the opal fields. A camp originally was a miner's residence on an opal claim. It's where the miner would live temporarily while he worked on his opal mine on his claim. However, as time has gone on, miners' camps have become a more permanent style of living. We talked about camps back in this video about the mystery population of Lightning Ridge, but we're going to dig a lot deeper in this video. The very first camps were very crude buildings built more often than not on the miner's claim right near their mine. That way the miner could keep an eye on his mine at all times. It also meant that he could stay on site without needing to travel, because this was back in the days of horses and bicycles and walking. Over time, camps have morphed from these rough old shacks to relatively modern houses with all of the conveniences. We'll look at those very soon. Modern camps are found on residential claims or Western Lands leases, often on preserved opal fields. A Western Lands lease is a kind of lease where you pay an annual fee to the government to borrow a patch of Crown land for a certain amount of time. Originally it was 99 years, then it was reduced to 20 years, and now there's talk of extending that period out again. The land is usually the size of a typical mineral claim, which is 2,500 square metres. A residential claim is a type of mineral claim on which you are allowed to build a camp. There's a little bit of murky water around that at the moment, but that's not what this video is about, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. It's all quite in flux. Before we look at a couple of camps spanning just over a century, let's quickly chat about some basic services that work differently at Lightning Ridge. Lightning Ridge Post Office has a lot of private mailboxes because residents who don't have a street address, the people that live in camps, are encouraged to get a private box because at least half the population of Lightning Ridge don't live on normal streets. Therefore, they don't have street addresses. There's no mail delivery in Lightning Ridge for anyone, street address or not. All mail has to be collected from the post office, either from your private mailbox or from a collection window at the appropriate time of day. While no one in Lightning Ridge gets their mail delivered, the residents who live in normal residential houses do get a weekly garbage collection provided by the local Shire Council. Those who live in camps, however, don't. Mostly for the same reason that the post isn't delivered. No one has an address. The roads on the opal fields are an absolute cobweb of tracks and trails, only about half of which are easily recognisable, and maybe half a dozen of which actually have names that anyone agrees upon. If you live in a camp, the part of your annual rates that would normally go towards paying for garbage collection instead goes to funding a number of skip bin or dumpster sites on the opal fields. The bins are positioned so that they're on fairly popular tracks and within reach of most people who live in camps, so you can dispose of household waste and a few other things in these bins. And another common service that Lightning Ridge simply does not have is town gas, or gas that's piped in directly from the supplier. The local electrical goods store is also an agency for a gas company that supplies large LPG gas bottles, so everyone just buys those and connects them up to run their cooking and maybe some of their heating. So we'll talk about water collection and retention options for camps very soon, but just as a general overview of the water situation in Lightning Ridge, town water is sourced from the Great Artesian Basin and is supplied to all residential blocks on town streets. So the normal houses around town get water. On the opal fields, it's very uncommon to have town water connected, but it's not impossible. The local Shire Council supplies the town with a standpipe, this thing, which can be used to fill water containers to take back to your camp. You can also organise water deliveries from local businesses for a nominal fee. The standpipe is officially only available to rate-paying camp owners. The vast majority of Lightning Ridge camps are truly off-grid with no connection at all to town power, town water, town sewerage or landline telephone. The closer a camp is to town, the more likely it may have access to one or more of those things. Many camps close to town had telephone lines run to them in the 1980s. Usually the deal with having a phone line installed is that you pay for the line from your nearest neighbour. So once everyone started paying for the extension from the nearest camp to theirs, it spread pretty quickly. Electricity is a little bit more difficult as the infrastructure is obviously a little bit more serious and expensive, though there are a few patches of electrified camps where one person has bitten the bullet and paid to have a line put in, and the neighbours have reaped the rewards afterwards. Generally, the further you are away from an official street, the less likely you are to have any town amenities at your camp. So we're going to have a look at two camps across two very different eras of Lightning Ridge's history to compare the innovations that have developed over time to solve some of life's little problems and to allow miners some creature comforts on the Opal fields. This is Fred Bodel's camp, as you can tell from the sign. We have been here many times before, so I'm actually going to hand over to an interview from many years ago with Barbara from the Lightning Ridge Historical Society to talk about a little bit of the history of Fred's camp, and then we'll have a look at a few elements of its design.
So this is Fred Bodel's camp, and in the earliest years, as far as we know, this was built in 1916 by German brothers, and they each had a little hut connected by a breezeway. And 1916, that was getting close to the very beginning of this little settlement, Nettleton, down here on the bottom of the 3 Mile. Fred Bodel, who lived here for many years, came here as a shearer in 1906, lived on the other side of today's Lightning Ridge originally, and gravitated to the various opal rushes. He probably mined over this side at some point in time before he moved here in the 1930s. So he did not build the camp here, but he moved into it in the 30s and died here in 1973, at the age of 92. Very well-known self-proclaimed mayor of the 3 Mile. And they did grade the road once coming down to the camp, and that was when the Governor General came to town in 1967 to open our sports club, which today is quite the center of activities.
Fred Bodel's camp is very likely to be the oldest surviving miners' camp at Lightning Ridge at 107 years old, and it represents the earliest technologies and architecture available to opal miners when the Lightning Ridge opal fields first opened up. Fred Bodel lived in this camp from around 1920 to the year that he died, which was 1973. And as far as I'm aware, not a great deal has changed in this camp over that 50 odd years that he lived here. So we're really looking at a camp as it was built back in the 1910s with very few changes. Fred Bodel's camp comprises two small buildings set apart at an angle with a breezeway between them. It's not a particularly complex design, and it suited Fred Bodel for many decades. And in stark contrast, this is the Ridge Castle, a quirky and innovative camp on the Sims Hill opal field, which is now accommodation that you could stay in when you visit Lightning Ridge. This was originally a camp that was built in the 1970s that's been extensively modified and personalised and made pretty special by its subsequent owners, and it's now a completely off-grid dwelling that uses some very modern technology to make things work, but it has a lot of very innovative solutions to problems and even a few interesting older features that we'll take a look at. Unlike Fred Bodel's camp, the Ridge Castle is a much more complex design that's evolved over the decades since the place was built in the 70s. The current configuration includes a few different areas: the Ridge Castle itself, the Knights' Quarters, the Oasis and the Squires' Lodgings, all of which feature construction from a different era and style. So the materials for Fred's camp are varied. There is corrugated tin for the chimneys and for the back walls, the side walls on the two side buildings. There's a lot of timber construction, some fairly crude timber construction, and there is also some Magnificent pressed tin that's been used. I love this stuff very, very much. Most of the materials here would have been scavenged materials and things that would have been pretty rarely available back at the time that this was built. Worth remembering, this was built in the 1910s. So there was no hardware store, there were no options for obtaining stuff apart from what you could get from the people around you and from what had been abandoned from previous buildings and shacks and things like that. So a lot of this material that this place is made of would have been stuff that was found lying around by the two German brothers that built it. So a lot of very resourceful repurposing of materials involved in building this place.
As they added the wood, they would have also had canvas or hessian and wrapped it around so that the building could actually have been built of hessian. And it could be that these uprights on the outside had the hessian lining, because if you look closely at Fred's camp, it's fairly new iron that's on the underside of these uprights.
The roof of Fred Bodel's place, which I can show you from here because this part is really quite low, is made from corrugated iron and bits of tin, and again just material that's been scavenged or sourced locally back in the 1910s by the German brothers that built the place. So, and I'll just show you again, there's another beautiful piece of pressed tin there that's been recycled from wherever that came from, but I love it. It's just amazing stuff, that.
Generally, we can tell the old iron because it's not galvanized. And of course, the rust indicates the age. The profile of early corrugated iron and the gauge or thickness would tell us how old certain pieces are that have been added. We have over here some pressed tin from Wunderlich. Wunderlich is actually an Australian product that was established in the 1880s and 90s. This looks like it would have been part of a ceiling in a commercial building, maybe in the town, not Lightning Ridge, but in a town. And there are various imprints on this Wunderlich tin that have been used throughout this cabin too. So lots of people have added their fingerprint.
This is going to become a bit of a recurring theme here, but one of the biggest challenges in building camps back in the old days was just getting materials. There really wasn't much of a hardware store back in the days of Fred Bodel's camp. Over the years there have been stores, general stores, stock and station agents, those kinds of things, but nothing like a Bunnings or wherever you imagine buying your building materials from. There were no quick deliveries. You had to make do with what you had. If you needed something, you had to recycle or reuse or scavenge or barter or just go without. Even towards the end of last century, saying that makes me feel old, it was difficult to get materials at Lightning Ridge, which is why a lot of locals, and this is a huge generalization, so please forgive me, but a lot of locals tend to have a little bit of a hoarding problem because historically it's never been a good idea to throw out anything because you might need it again and you probably won't be able to get another one. One of the biggest innovations in the century between Fred Bodel's hut and the Ridge Castle is a pretty boring one, but it makes a huge difference when dealing with the extreme temperatures at Lightning Ridge.
It has now got insulation in it. I'm not sure at what point it would have been insulated. So, at what point in the previous, or the current owners, I guess, the parents of the current owners would have insulated it. I don't think it would have been built with that originally. So the basic construction is still rocks with a mortar, a concrete mortar, timber, and there would have been, I think, some corrugated iron, and obviously there's a lot more now in its modernisation. So the kitchen roof, for example, inside is brand new corrugated iron, as distinct from the other areas which are gyprock, timber beams. I think when the councils took ownership of it, it was a very primitive structure, like a much more primitive, that as they lived in it over the years, they modernised it to the eras that they were here in the sort of 70s and 80s and 90s. So yeah, tile floor, clip lock flooring. There's other areas that are basically just painted concrete. It's been left really roughly, so there's a texture to it, which is actually really nice underfoot, cooler in summer. This room, which was the councils used it as a cutting room, has got car doors for windows. They are functional, they do work. And then you can see it's got a painted, really very lightly rendered and painted over the rockwork that was there. We've got hessian on the walls. It's decorative now, but it would have been true to what would have been used at the time when the castle was originally built. Either decorative appeal and or a bit more extra insulation or just a cover for what was behind it.
So lighting at Fred Bodel's camp, as we come into the bedroom side of the camp, is really no more complicated than this. It's just an oil lamp. He would have had a lot of candles. There was no such thing as electricity at the time. There was no 12-volt power. There was no solar. You had daylight in the daytime, and you had... Ooh, Fred was apparently quite short. You had daylight in the daylight, and you had candles and lanterns at night. That's about all you had. Back in the 1910s, 1920s, there was no consideration of power of any sort. So this is completely off-grid in that regard. Power simply didn't exist. I remember living in camps when I was growing up in Lightning Ridge back in the 1980s. We had a camp that was just a caravan with a bit of a shed leaning over the side of it. I remember most nights sitting around the tiny little table in the caravan with candles burning because we had no form of power whatsoever. Another camp that we lived in had a generator for electricity, but you could only run it for a few hours at a time. So we would watch television on a 12-volt television that sat in the living room with a long electrical cord that went out the window. And then we'd park the car outside the window and we'd connect the cord to another cord that dangled out the front of the car that was connected to the 12-volt battery in the car, so that we could easily plug the TV in for a few hours each night, as long as someone took the car for a drive the next day to recharge the battery. The Ridge Castle has slightly more sophisticated power systems.
Yeah, so a pretty decent battery bank, inverter. Then we have, so we originally we were using this big diesel generator when we're using it quite frequently when we first started the accommodation. And then the owners invested in more batteries and more solar panels, and so upgraded the system. So now we only rarely will run the petrol. We just have a little Honda petrol generator that we'll run to top up the batteries if they start to get a bit low with a cloudy day or two and we're quite busy, or where we've had extra usage. What we've got is really amply sufficient for a full house, so probably 14, 15 guests.
Water collection at Fred Bodel's camp comes from, again, the tin roof, and then it comes down and gets stored in these tanks. There's a couple of water tanks here. This one isn't connected to anything. I think this is something that's perhaps just being stored here for the moment. This is a tank that's been here for a very long time, and this drains down from the roof. So that would have been the main water collection. If we look over here, there is yet another tank just down there. So plenty of water storage, and all of the roof on this camp would have collected into those tanks. Pretty clever. As far as water usage at Fred Bodel's camp, there is literally no plumbing. So the water from this tank is pulled out through the hole in the top. There is actually no tap at the bottom. It doesn't go into the kitchen part of the camp. It's just a collection vat for water, and you'd scoop the water back out of where it came from. The
main water storage is these two tanks. Obviously the water is being captured off the newer roofs primarily, so a roof off the apartment, the roof off the barbecue area, and the roof off the oasis, and then they're all channeled into these two tanks. When we're busy during our peak seasons, and if we're not getting very much rain, we will have to top up, and so then we buy artesian water from a water supplier and top the main tanks up. They're just reticulated. There's a pressure pump on the system and provides water for the 3 properties into bathrooms, kitchens.
So speaking of rainwater collection, that thing is a homemade DIY first flush diverter to prevent all the crud from on the roof from ending up in the water tanks. It appears to have been made out of an old Pepsi bottle. We don't throw anything away here.
So yeah, we've still got an outdoor shower using a tree.
Fred Bodel's camp is about as basic as it gets for water heating. You would boil a pot or a kettle if you wanted hot water. The Ridge Castle has a slightly better option with on-demand gas hot water. However, at some point in the past, the Ridge Castle had a classic Lightning Ridge solution to heating water. So we're looking at some really old real estate here at the Ridge Castle. This is a barbecue, or it was a barbecue. This oddly round stone contraption is actually what would be locally called a pig. A pig is normally a drum, a 44-gallon drum or a smaller drum on its side with 4 little legs under it to suspend it over a fire. But in this case, we've got this ridiculously elaborate thing constructed inside a little stone shelter. There's the drum. And that's where you'd light your fire. And I guess that's where you'd have your bath. The bathroom facilities at Fred Bodel's camp are effectively a hole in the ground, and I'm not showing you that because I don't have access to it right now, but it's not pretty, but I imagine it was pretty functional. The Ridge Castle has proper flush toilets in all of the accommodations, which is great. It's actually quite easy to implement flush toilets in a camp. The only catch is making sure that you have enough water on hand to flush them, but modern toilets with their half flush capacities are making that a lot easier than it used to be.
And this is an outdoor dunny that is flush and proper. But look, it's got the look and feel of including mannequin parts for toilet roll holders. It's a modern interpretation of an old school way of doing things. And we like to tell our guests that frogs are a sign of a healthy ecosystem. So when they write to us and tell us there are frogs in the loo, we say they don't jump up. It'll be okay.
So speaking of facilities, this is the old outhouse at the Ridge Castle. It's no longer functional, but it would have simply been a hole in the ground. Heating at Fred Bodel's camp, not too complex. You can see behind me there are 2 chimneys on each side. There's an open fireplace in the end of each of the buildings that make up the camp.
In this camp, there's a fireplace in each little hut, and that would be for the immediate heating around your knees as you sat in front of the fire having your meal.
And cooling is accomplished by means of a breezeway, which I'm cautiously walking backwards through right now. The breezeway sits between the 2 buildings. That's the bedroom on that side and that's the kitchen on that side, and it's a fairly warm day today, and I can tell you it's quite effective. It just funnels the air that's coming through straight through the middle of the building. It really does evacuate quite a bit of the heat out of both of the side buildings, and it makes for a reasonably comfortable place to be. I'm not going to say it's an amazingly comfortable place to be, but it certainly beats being out in the sun. So it's a fairly clever design. It's quite effective at keeping the place cool.
We do orientate the camp in the direction of the sun. We have heard so many times that in winter, your longest sun is coming from the north. So if you can put your sleeping side to the north, maybe you want your kitchen side to the north. Maybe that's where you'd rather be warmest in the morning in a cool winter's day. But the west is where the setting sun's going to be and where you're going to be maybe reclining after a hard day's work. But planning the orientation of your camp is going to make a big difference. Sometimes you don't have a choice, but people do consider that. And in the summer months, you can take the iron off of the windows that are behind these curtains, and you would have a nice open space looking out into the surrounds, and of course more air coming in. In winter, which it is, we cover them up for a quieter and warmer time than we might have had. Certainly the iron heats up with the sun on it, and there's a certain warmth even now at 3:30 in the day.
As we mentioned earlier when we were talking about the materials that these places are made from, the Ridge Castle has the huge innovation of being insulated, which goes a long way to keeping the temperature relatively steady inside the buildings.
Like, we just basically use water coolers and fans. The water coolers do a pretty good job, actually. Yeah, they do take the sting out of it.
The Knights' Quarters, the largest accommodation option at the Ridge Castle, also has ceiling fans.
You can see a higher ceiling height, so we're able to have fans that run on the solar power. So there's 4 sort of primary fans that help with air movement and flow.
Unfortunately, limitations with the solar system mean that running more powerful air conditioners for cooling isn't really an option.
Like, people just text me and say, "Can we have the air conditioning remote?" And I say, "Sorry, the air conditioner doesn't work." It would work, but we would need to run the generator at this stage. Unless we only run the generator if we run out of power because of cloudy days or because someone's brought a heater or multiple heaters and turned them on and run the batteries out. So when we have guests, we really try and educate them that what they've got is what they've got, and they need to be warmed by the fire outside and put extra blankets on during winter, because if they run even those little portable, like the little fans that you might put next to your office desk or something, they just drain the battery so quickly. And so we would, maybe if someone put even one or two of those on that they bring themselves, we're out of power, and then we would have to start the generator to top up the batteries. Yep. So we alert them that they're hot in summer and cold in winter, and that we've got the best strategies that we can, and that's part of the experience.
It's all part of the adventure.
It's part of the adventure, yeah. Some people like that, and some people come anyway, and then they're not big fans of it. But it's not something we try and hide, and it's certainly not something that we're withholding power or, that we're trying to make people's lives uncomfortable. It's just that's the experience of off-grid living, is a mindfulness around consumption of electricity and water.
Fred Bodel's kitchen takes up one of the 2 buildings that make up the camp. The kitchen has an eating area, a stove, cooking area, wood stove, and a food storage area. Fred's laundry would probably have been a metal tub, and there's a clothesline outside that's just a piece of fencing wire stretched across with this amazing support in the middle in the form of a chair with a piece of wood on top. If it works, it works. There are a number of cooking technologies at work at the Ridge Castle, and some great history in the old equipment that's still installed.
I think this was a barbecue, so it's almost like bits, have evolved even, because there's that barbecue and then there's this, more sort of fancy built-in cooker with, another sort of stovetop fire, water heater, washing machine. So, this would have been laundry kitchen area.
The original wood-fired stoves at the castle are no longer in use. They've been replaced with modern gas cooking.
Original old stove, which doesn't get used now but looks beautiful.
This is quite a long video, and I'm going to confidently assume that if you're still here and you're still watching, you're probably interested in this subject matter. If you're interested enough, you might want to consider subscribing. The button's just down there, but you might also consider supporting Curiosity Mine on Patreon. Patreon is a service that allows you to directly support your favourite creators to allow them to continue making the content that you enjoy. If you think Curiosity Mine deserves it and you'd like to help me be able to make videos like this into the future, please head to patreon.com/curiositymine or curiositymine.com/Patreon. Both go to the same place, and consider maybe supporting the channel directly. If you do, you'll get your name on this list of amazing people who are already generously supporting Curiosity Mine, and you'll be my best friend forever. But for now, let's get back to off-grid living. No refrigeration because no power, no option, no gas, nothing. So food would have been stored in basically a meat safe, which is just a cupboard with open sides, open mesh sides to allow airflow to hopefully keep your food cool and keep the flies off it. A number of new refrigeration technologies arose in the interim years between Fred Bodel's camp and the Ridge Castle, including gas refrigerators, 12-volt and solar-powered refrigerators, and modern 240-volt refrigerators, which are efficient and well insulated enough to stay cold using minimal power. The Ridge Castle uses inverted solar power to run 240-volt refrigerators. Fridges are actually quite efficient to run on solar power, so it's an excellent solution. But aside from that, the Ridge Castle also has an older food storage option that's surprisingly efficient and not super common in camps.
It was a cellar in the original, because obviously this is the original sort of kitchen area that may or may not have had a roof over it.
I'm going into the cellar. Wow. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, just wait longer. Well, that's the cellar. And my immediate observation is it's 10 degrees cooler in here. Wow. That's cool. Literally cool. And there's a number of spiders. The cellar is built underneath a water tank and it's built out of ironstone, so it retains and transmits a lot of cool from both the tank above and the ground below. So it's a very efficient way of maintaining a cool temperature for food storage or wine storage or whatever you choose to put in your cellar. Connectivity doesn't really mean a great deal at Fred Bodel's camp. There was no internet when this camp was built. In fact, there was no internet when the last person to live in this camp stopped living in it. There was barely telephone anywhere within this area when the camp was built and when Fred lived here. Nowadays, you can get mobile phone reception right here. I get 3 bars of 5G standing right where I am. So if you were to live here now, your connectivity problems are solved. But as far as connectivity with the outside world, I think Fred's only option was to come to his front door right here and shout at his neighbours. So yeah, not a lot of connectivity at this one. The Ridge Castle, in stark contrast to Fred's, has high-speed Wi-Fi for guests. One of the biggest boons for people living in off-grid camps in recent years has been the advent of fast and relatively reliable wireless broadband internet, particularly for stationary installations, where you can use booster antennas to get everything as good as you can get it. So in 2024, you can watch YouTube on the Opal field. Heck, you could be doing that right now. While Fred's place is on the flat and receives pretty good mobile reception, the Ridge Castle is on the far side of Sims Hill, one of the highest points around Lightning Ridge, so mobile reception is just not fantastic. To quote from the Ridge Castle's website, "At the Ridge Castle, mobile reception can be spotty. In our experience, Telstra has good reception, Optus comes and goes, other carriers generally doubtful." And also in the connectivity category is television, and I apologise for the amount of nostalgia I'm about to dump on anyone who lived in Lightning Ridge in the 1980s and 1990s. Lightning Ridge has had television since at least the 1970s, possibly earlier, with VHF channels and UHF channels in 2024, with Lightning Ridge having full digital reception of all of the national channels, with further options for satellite or internet-based television and streaming and all that as well. However, this has not always been the case. When I was growing up in Lightning Ridge in the 1980s and the 1990s, at any given time we would usually receive the ABC and one commercial channel, which would change periodically as the contracts and the licensing changed hands. At one point it was Prime 7.
This is Prime Television, your local station.
At another point it was Channel 10. And at other times it was these weird little regional channels like QTV. QTV, the place to be. And NQTV. The place to be. And Impaja. The latter of which still exists today as an affiliate of Channel 9. Which brings me to another weird quirk of living in Lightning Ridge. Back in the day, because Lightning Ridge is so close to the Queensland border, we would be served Queensland television. Most of the time this was no different to New South Wales television, except that the commercials were very localised to central and far north Queensland. I think everyone who grew up in Lightning Ridge in the 90s is familiar with Silly Sollies. Nobody saves your money like Silly Solly! As well as the Carpentaria Buffaloes Club and Bellenmoya Toyota, even if they've never been to those places. But the weird thing is that during summer, because Queensland doesn't practice daylight savings, the entire television schedule would be out by 1 hour, so everything on TV would be on an hour later than it was advertised. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it was a huge deal when you were a kid and you wanted to watch an 8:30 movie on a school night and it didn't start until 9:30. So those are some of the innovations and methodologies used in camps at Lightning Ridge. People live in off-grid camps at Lightning Ridge, often because there's no other option. It's logistically impossible, or in some cases it's not legal, to have permanent services connected to a Western Lands lease. So if you choose to live in a camp, you're choosing to live off-grid by default. But one of the things that's really exciting in 2024 is that we are now able to leverage the knowledge of those who choose to live off-grid as a lifestyle. Back in the 80s, when my family were living in camps on the Nobby's Opal Field and Deep Ballar's Opal Field, there were no resources available to help people live more comfortably or more efficiently, other than asking the guy down the road for advice, which only works if the guy down the road actually has a better solution than you do. But now, in 2024, there's the internet. and there's YouTube. And there's huge communities of people who are doing all of the R&D for us. So if you want to know how to warm up an off-grid home efficiently, you can jump on YouTube and you can search for heating an off-grid home in, I don't know, Siberia, and get some advice from people who really know how to heat a place up. You want to know how to cool it down in summer? Off-grid cooling in Death Valley. And bam, you'll find good advice right there. Need advice on lights or solar power, off-grid showers, whatever it is that you need, it will be there. And with eBay and Amazon and Temu and whatever else, you can get stuff delivered and you're in business. It's a great time to be alive and to live in a camp. Living in camps at Lightning Ridge is both a lifestyle necessity and a lifestyle choice, and it's an important part of the community identity for the opal mining town. If you'd like to experience living in a very comfortable camp with all of the modern amenities and some really awesome quirks of architecture and design going back several decades, then please check out the links in the description to take a look at the accommodation options at the Ridge Castle. This is not a sponsored video. I just really appreciate having the opportunity to visit the castle and have a look at some of the fantastic innovations they have in their place to ensure their guests are both comfortable while they stay and also experience a unique and authentic taste of Lightning Ridge off-grid camp life. This video was made with the help and support of the Ridge Castle, with special thanks to Rebel and the Australian Opal Centre and the Lightning Ridge Historical Society. Links to all of those organisations in the video description. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to Curiosity Mine on YouTube and maybe even supporting the channel through Patreon. Links are in the description. And thank you for watching.